Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast on India independent films. This is your host, Sashi, and today I'm going to be talking to filmmaker Hemant Gaba, who's known for his films Shuttlecock Boys, which was his first independent feature film made in 2011, and the film X Past is Present, where he directed a segment. It's a collaborative feature film, and he was one of the directors out of the 11 directors who made the film, and his documentaries Japan in Nagaland, made in 2015, and An Engineer Dream, made in 2018, which is a depiction of the life of students in Kota who are preparing for entrance examinations, both engineering and medical. And this film won him the National Award for Best Film in the non-feature category in 2019. So today in this podcast, we are going to be talking about his work, his life, and also thoughts on independent filmmaking. Welcome, Hemant. How are
Uh,
you?
Thank you so much, Shashi. Yep, I'm good. Uh, Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Let's begin with An Engineer Dream, the documentary which you made in 2018, and it's being talked
Yes.
about a lot right now on Twitter. Many people are considering it to be a very realistic depiction of the lives of students in Kota, and
Mm.
and when I watched it, and I found it so amazing that there are no judgments, no biases. You're just depicting how life is, life just the way life is in Kota. So, could you tell me, like, how did you pick these students that you wanted to follow, and how was it convincing them to be in your film? How did you convince them and their families?
So we had interviewed almost 100, a little more than 100 kids and teenagers for the film. And in a lot of cases, let's say if we would interview somebody and we would just interview for like 5 minutes using a phone, just to get a sense of the person and whether she or he is comfortable and what kind of background he or she has. So after we did that, and then we shortlisted few, and then we would request them to get permission for them from their parents, and in most cases their parents would refuse. So then we would move on to the next batch. So that's how we just kept doing it and doing it. It went, I mean, over 100 almost. In the cases, like in these four characters who eventually came on board, so one, the Shashwat, he said that he's 18 plus and his parents not gonna agree, but he wants to be part of the film. So we thought, okay, I mean, if there is somebody who's enthusiastic to be part of the film, and he's right that he's 18 plus and he does not need his parents' consent. I don't think his parents even know. I mean, I don't know whether his parents know even till date, or he has shown the film to his parents. So that's how he came on board. With the Shubha, the girl, we had gone to one college, sorry, one hostel where it was a girls' hostel through some connection. And then we were supposed to interview a couple of them, and then all of them backed out. And then our crew was there in the hostel, and she herself approached that she wants to be part of the film, and then she also took consent from her parents. So I mean, these two cases sort of worked out. It was just by chance when when we were just trying to hit, and something really got hit. And in case of Suraj, what happened was the associate director, Vedant Sharma, he is actually originally from Kota, and he also went through this whole process. And he had a teacher who now became a founder of a coaching institute. So he spoke to him, generally asking him if he would recommend any students, and he recommended Suraj. He said Suraj is on scholarship and he's one of the bright students. And because we went to Suraj and his father through a teacher's reference, so they agreed. I mean, that gentleman was his teacher also. So it just worked out in different ways. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it was just like unique in terms of the
True.
way it worked out. Yeah.
True, true. And could you tell me about the scene where the girl cries at the end when she isn't able to make it? Like, how difficult is it shooting something like that? And do they, does it become difficult for the person also? Like, the girl also? Why, like, my thought was, why would she allow someone to shoot
Mhm.
such a vulnerable moment?
Mhm.
How was a scene like that made?
So she had actually cleared the exam, and then she was still crying because her marks was very less. And then, so what had happened was that before that, we had shot with her enough. And as a guy, I was not, excuse me, as a guy, I was not allowed to enter into the girls' hostel. So we had two female crew members. Actually, editor Sabah Rahman was shooting, and once there was also Shilpi Batra Advani. She also went few times. So Shubha had become very comfortable with them. In fact, Sabah had actually gone to her house in Surat also, because in the beginning we see a couple of scenes from. So there was Sabah did a very good job of sort of forming the bond. And after a while, the camera was like, okay, I mean, the just camera is just there. So before the this result come out, Sabah has already been talking to her over camera, and then it was just a continuation. So in my opinion, she was not very. She was just doing her thing, and she had gotten used to that the camera is there some of the days. So I think that was the moment. And eh, I mean, so she has seen the film, of course, and she was completely all right with it. And yeah, but there was also actually a couple of things that happened which we didn't shoot. Like she had actually on that very day after this scene, towards the evening, she was still very upset and she had actually fainted in the hostel. So I thought that was like much worse to if that would have been shot. But I thought this was still okay in terms of, yeah. I mean, if you really compare like what we know and what we project on screen, but yeah, to the audiences, they will not know the background story. So I
Hmm.
can imagine. Yeah, I hope it
And
answers. Yeah.
definitely, it does. When you make a documentary, like, do you show it to the people who have been shot and then release it? Like, do you take their consent before releasing it? Is it
So
important? Yeah.
I think it is very important, and we did this. We did follow the same process, but in couple of cases, like Shubha's and Shashwat case, and in fact in Ali's case also. So the film was not released, but it started going to the festivals, and then they saw it little later because nobody is based out of Delhi, and I'm based out of Delhi. So with respect to Shashwat, I actually traveled to Bhopal just to show him the film. With Shubha, it what happened was that she is from Surat and was studying in Dehradun. So she would go by Delhi, and when she was going by Delhi, we met her on her like transit time, when we went to a restaurant with her. We had lunch together, and then she saw the film on my laptop. So it
Okay.
is
That's nice.
important. Only in the case of Suraj, he saw all the footage. So the film was in edit, but his father wanted to watch the portions that we were using in the film. So we showed them, in fact, to Suraj, to his father, to his aunt, and to also his cousin. When the film was in edit and the film was not out yet, and then we took the consent from them that these are the portions that we intend to use in the film, and then they were okay. And we actually also took their consent on a written form, so it's not that like a oral consent also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But how did you convince the coaching institutes? Like, now, a lot of coaching institutes are resenting the content which is being made on Quota, and
Mm.
because it is a critique on the system. So how did you convince
Mm.
them? How was it shooting the that result declaration scene, which is at the end where this guy tops,
Mm.
and how was it all done?
Yeah, so with respect to coaching institutes, excuse me, although media does say that coaching institutes are accountable, but if you ask me, in my personal opinion, coaching institutes are just providing the service because there is like they are just
A
taking
demand.
advantage of the situation because there is demand.
Yeah.
But who is creating the demand? It's people like us, it's families, it's peers, and it's society at large that is actually creating
Hmm.
that demand. I mean, we will be always bombarded with a lot of things, and it depends on us what we'll choose. And the moment we start choosing it, there'll automatically be a demand. So,
True.
so in fact, just to share with you that when I went to Kota for the first time, I also went with this pre mindset, like sort of prejudice that it's a coaching institute that are antagonists. But only after spending some time there, I realized they are just Like they're like a small,
Facilitators.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
just the facilitators. I mean, of course they have their agendas of profit making over students mental health, of course that is there, but
Hmm.
who is making, like, who is creating that space for somebody to exploit it? It's us. So and coming to your question, that how did we convince them? So what we did was that we interviewed all the founders first,
Okay.
and or the owners or the founders or anybody in the top management committee, and then we tried to gain access. But to be honest, we didn't get good access in coaching institutes. That's the reason we have very limited footage. And also, the moment we put camera in a
Yeah.
classroom,
Yeah.
the teacher would be at his best. Or we would
Okay.
have, I mean, we would need to shoot, let's say, at least 20-30 days together at a stretch, that they would lose this
Yeah.
consciousness towards the camera.
Consciousness.
But that didn't happen. We were granted only very limited, like hourly kind of access, and that's to only very few times. So, and we didn't manage to cross that barrier. So I think in terms of creating access, we failed at that attempt. But it is okay, I mean.
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
It is a difficult process making a
Yeah.
documentary.
Yeah.
Can you take me through the technicality of this shooting process? If you could share with me the equipments you used.
Yeah. So we were initially thinking of using only Sony A7S II or A7S III camera, but what happened was that we wanted to. So in a lot of situations, like, so Kota doesn't have any camera equipment rentals. I mean, they have some wedding photographers. So most of the times things will go from Delhi, and we tried to hire somebody locally in Kota, but who was not available all the time. So also then Vedant, who's the associate director, and he was based in Kota for that few months. So and he was not a camera person. So we gave him a small professional handy camera which shoot 4K. It was like Sony professional handy camera, but it's a very small thing, and one does not need to know any technicalities. It's like just you use the phone, you zoom in, zoom out, etc., and like a small tripod, and you just put it on it and just start shooting whenever there is need to be. And then so we used actually in some of the scenes we have also used 5D. We have used Sony A7. We have used this pro consumer handy camera, and we have also used Nikon in couple of, like, few times, because also we would not know many a times that what's going to happen. And then moment we take camera from Delhi to Kota, we our bill starts running for every day. So so it was a little tricky. I mean, I wish that we owned the cameras. We did buy this small camera, like the consumer pro consumer handy camera, but other cameras were always rented, or it was owned by the camera person in some cases. So that's what we ended up using. That's the reason you also see a mishmash of footage. I mean, the footage or the visual quality is not consistent also, which we know, and something I mean, we had to sort of work with. And also in Shaswa's case, some of the footage is from handy camera, and some of the footage is from his own phone, and his phone was not even HD. So that's the reason we see that we have boxed it, because if we would make it full screen, then it would just get pixelated. So some of the footage of his like talking to the camera directly is boxed. That's the reason. So it's like multiple formats has happened during the filmmaking. I wish we were more professional. I mean, not professional, but we were more equipped in in terms of in terms of making sure that it is uniform. But it is okay. It's a learning process. I think we'll try to do a better job in the next
But does
project.
that matter? Like, it's about the content which comes out, right?
Actually, in these times, it does matter. I mean, especially, let's say, if you want to sell your product to an OTT platform, it does matter, because a lot of OTT platforms actually prefer 4K or minimum HD. So, let's say content. If look, I'm not talking about this film. Let's say if any other film in which the footage or the format is not consistent, but the film manages to let's say win some big international award, then it would not matter to an OTT, because then the OTT will sell it on the, let's say, winning that international big award. But in other cases, like our film didn't win any big awards internationally speaking, so it is difficult for us probably to try to sell it to OTT platform. Although it did find a birth in a lot of broadcasting stations, but broadcasting stations has lower uh, limit. I mean, capacity or lower requirements as compared to OTT these days. So I mean, we also have grown up on this thing that always content matters, but I think after the Netflix and the OTT era,
Okay.
I think it the formats and the consistency in the visual form, these things do matter, until unless your films make it so big that it transcends
Hmm.
the boundary of those
All these
limitations.
specifications and all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, talking about documentary as an art form, I have this question for you: like, how to balance conversations with silences? Like, it is always about interviewing someone or talking to someone. How do you find those other elements to balance these conversations with?
So, while making this project, we were trying not to have any interview sections at all.
Hmm.
We wanted to
Yeah.
make it like a very scene based thing. And that usually happens when you continue following the person and your character's daily actions or his daily or her daily encounters with his or her family members. Or so when you continuously continue happening, like for example, there's a scene in the film when Ali is talking to his mother over phone, and we were just happened to be shooting, and his mother called, or he called his mother, or I think his mother called, and then we continue just shooting that process. So those kind of things will happen organically when we are constantly following the character instead of we tell the character to take any action.
Hmm.
But in terms of, so what happened in this project was that since we got very little time, so the interviews that we see were supposed to be research interviews actually.
Okay.
But like the first getting to know how each other, like get familiar with the character, and we thought that we will not use this interview, we'll continue filming and we'll have enough material from the otherwise following the characters scenes or the whatever they do in their daily lives. But we realized that we got very little access after a certain amount of time because the students also had to prepare for IIT. So they had a high constraint on time. We would actually wait for 2 3 days to get access for 1 hour. So those kind of limitations crop up. But generally speaking, as a documentary art practice, I mean, of course, there is a conventional method where you actually interview people. And in some cases, that is the visual approach that the filmmaker is adopting. And especially if we see in American documentary formats, that's a very common way to do it. But whereas if we see some European side and especially the Balkan side or East European or Russia side, they try to follow a very different approach. You'll rarely see any interviews in those documentaries. I'm not trying to generalize, but more or less broadly speaking. So I think creating a good relationship and creating good accessibility with your characters, and then so I attended a master class in Serbia where there was a filmmaker, and I really liked the way he approached it. He forced himself not to take any interviews. He took only
Hmm.
audio interviews, and then when he took only audio interviews, he's forcing himself as a filmmaker not to use any interview section, and then
Okay.
create like use audio as a means. And I mean, so for example, if there is a lot of visuals, and then he could use a mix of audio as well as
Hmm.
those visuals, but he sort of forced himself not to interview any character so that there will not be any scope of using interviews. And it's
Yeah.
not that using interviews bad or anything. It's just that we have like the documentary approach has also evolved and branched into many ways, that also it has been started being compared to fiction, and that's the reason we see that there's a lot of dramatization also in the documentaries. Sometimes
Yeah.
dramatization happens either staging a scene, or sometimes it happens just uh, creating the order of the scenes in a such way, like we have done it. Like there's when Suraj talks about the difference between MTech and MBA, etc. So that scene was of course shot in the beginning, but we put it in the end. That's also a
Okay.
way to dramatize
Hmm.
it. But in some cases, the dramatization would also happen with visuals, or with the filmmaker actually
Bring in
intervening into the
music.
process, or with music. So there are multiple ways to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just sort of blabbering on overall things, but there are a lot of facets to it. And with respect to interview, it's a very well recognized standard and conventional format. But a lot of people are trying not to use actually
Yeah,
interviews, because just to make it more fiction like, or create more drama, because the moment the character,
docufiction. Yeah.
yeah, because the moment a character speaks to the camera in the format of interview, it becomes sort of less personal. He's just telling you something. So it is, I mean, it is sort of less interesting as compared to if he was part of some action. Sometimes,
Okay.
not always, of course.
Sure, sure. Like I think like many filmmakers are trying to blur the lines between documentary and fiction.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, and those are also quite interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your first film, Shuttlecock Boys. I
Mhm.
read somewhere that you said that it took you 2.5 years to make this film. Can
Mhm.
you take me through the process of making one's first film? Like how are the what are the conversations like with producers and financiers, that when you don't have anything to show that you have made before, how do you convince
Hmm.
someone?
Hmm. So, in our case, we were also the producers and financiers, and it was a very low budget film. And now, when I look back in hindsight, I think it was not a wise thing to do to jump to a feature. I mean, I should have made some shots for practice and to create a skill, or let's say to improve the skill, which I did not have at all. And uh, so we didn't really have any. I mean, so I was used to work in software before, and I worked
Yeah.
in software for 7 8 years. And then I knew that if I want to make this transition, there was used to be a very standard approach, at least in 2008 when I did the transition, that you go and assist some director or you join a film school. I thought I'm too late for a film school, although now when I look back, I wasn't. And I never wanted to assist anybody, because I thought, because like in the especially typical Hindi film industry, those are the not the films that I associate with. And I wondered that what would I learn, barring some management things, because I knew the way it works, etc. So I thought, okay, let me just go and make the film, and we'll see whatever happens. And for me, it'll like be like a film school, an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And another mistake that we did, probably now it looks like a mistake, but probably when we were making that decision, it wasn't. We ended up shooting in film format. We shot in Super
Okay.
16. And unfortunately, what happened was the lab that was involved, which was one of the probably the most prestigious lab in the country, they screwed the negatives, or the technicians screwed the negatives. And then the film became like, the film is from 1930s with a lot of visual scratches. And then they refused to fix it. So I had to fight with the owners, actually the management, and then the owners, for about a year to get it fixed. So the film was digitally restored.
Mm-hmm.
So the film was shot on Super 16 with only two lenses, and the lenses were from NFDC. They were not very sharp lenses; they were very old lenses. And on the top of it, then the film was digitally restored. So
Mm-hmm.
the film became very, sort of flattish, and like visually there was very less meat in it, in a way. I mean, also because we didn't shoot it very well, and it was just okay. Uh, we were trying to deal with a lot of limitations, but I'm not trying to justify. I'm just trying to share my mistakes, so that if anybody listens to it, I mean, if they want to adopt a different path, maybe. I mean, there are, of course, some filmmakers who just make their first feature without making any shorts or television or any documentaries, and they hit the mark. But I wasn't definitely one of them. Uh, so hence I look at it as a. I mean, I wish I would have done it differently, but I'm sure somebody who hit the mark would think differently also. So there's always, this thing.
It's a huge task, like starting out with a feature film and making it, like going
Mm.
through the entire process and making it. Could you tell me why did you choose to be an independent filmmaker? Like, why does one choose to be an independent filmmaker? Why not make, I mean, I'm just throwing this thought, like, why not
Mm.
make the same film with a subversive idea, with something which is not mainstream, but with a studio? Why not convince a studio? Why not convince a producer?
I think today it feels like it is possible since last 4 5 years that at least let's say if I want to make five kind of films or five films, at least it is possible that studio or a production house might be interested at least in one or two of them. May not
Okay.
like all the five ideas because of commercial interests or
Risks. Yeah.
risks.
Yeah.
But at least in back in 2008, I didn't think that was. At least I thought so. Maybe I didn't research the market enough. But I thought that no, first of all, nobody would want to put money on a person who has little to no experience, almost no experience, and nothing to show. So I
Hmm.
would want to take that risk. And if why we would want to like, there are people who would want to think independent filmmaking. It's also um, when it is not independent filmmaking, when it's like a studio thing, then also somebody has to put somebody has to vouch for you, and that vouching for you generally happens when there is substantial amount of relationship between two individuals. So, for example, in a typical scenario in the Hindi film industry, an assistant director would assist the main director for many years. Then the main director will be willing to vouch for the assistant director that he can also become a director and he'll probably produce his films. I mean, we have seen several
Yeah.
examples like that. So, but that means several years of journey, and also we don't know whether this journey will be successful or not. So, it's also risking that much amount of time. So, having an independent thought is one thing, but this is also another element that
True.
we would want to put for that many number of years. And most of the times, or let's say half of the times, we may not even, let's say, like the director that we're working with or assisting, but we're doing it because we also have to survive. And so I think it's a very lot of variables are there from a practical standpoint. Whereas then like a lot of independent filmmakers, at least in the country that I know, are probably making independent films because they don't would not find easily studio financing, especially the sort of art house films, which are maybe, if I can dare say, slightly meditative style or slow pace films,
Hmm.
which usually get a run in festivals, sometimes even big festivals. I mean, I don't think it is easy for them to find studio financing because nobody would buy them in terms of commercially speaking. And most of these films actually end up in festivals, and then maybe they will get a movie release, and movie doesn't
Yeah.
pay much. So then how do they recover money? So that is also a pattern. And then there is a let's say there are filmmakers who don't want to work with established actors because
Yeah.
their
Because.
yeah, so their
Mhm.
film demands that, or they think that the film demands working with amateurs or real life people. So there is also that practice of thought. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I guess there are multiple reasons why
True.
independent filmmakers make those choices.
True. So, I'm just throwing in one more thought.
Hmm.
Like what about making a film without like maybe established actors, but also lowering the budget so much that there are no risks, but still making it with a studio. Are studios not interested in projects like that? Does it like is it futile for them?
Yeah, because what happens is the studio also has quite a big amount of running cost. And when, let's say, their executives or their CEO, or let's say even if it's a team of 5 to 10 people, they have a big chunk of monthly or yearly expenditure, which is salaries or infrastructure, logistics, etc. Now, when they make a film, then they also they would want the film. Let's say if they have an option to make 10 films of very low budget or versus 3 films with medium to big budget, they'll always go for 3 films, because with 10 films they'll also have to put in more effort because it's
Yes.
10 number. And also with 10 films they will not be able to bring it out in bigger let's say bigger marketing, because if the budget is, let's say, 50 lakhs, how can we spend 1 crore on marketing? It just doesn't, the financials would not make sense. So that's the reason I think studio generally is are not interested in very low budget films. I mean, at least for them it has to be 3 4 cr into whatever I know. I'm
Okay.
talking about mainly Hindi film industry. Of course, there are new studios like Udli Films tried experimenting with 1.5 CR kind of a things, but they were, I think, successful in the beginning. But now all their films landed in OTT platforms, and now they have moved from any sort of art house films to again very commercial. It has to be like a
Yes.
yeah. So even somebody who experimented and have changed directions, so which is not an encouraging thing for other studios who might would have wanted to follow this.
Yeah, that's there. Take me through the process of distribution of an indie
Mm.
film, like with the films that you have made and the film festival route. How has it been
Mm.
for you?
So I think every film had a different journey. So with Shuttlecock Boys, we were lucky probably that in 2012 something like Directors Rare came up, and we managed to go get about 8 to 10 theaters release. At least it was a release. It was, I will call it, is more like a skeleton release, but okay, it's just a stamp in a way. It didn't make any money on box office. It was, I think, not even 10 lakhs. I mean, it was very less. And then, but advantage was that we managed to sell the film to Eros Now. We were still in losses, but we were at least okay about the fact that we made a product, we made a film, and it is at least available out in the market. Uh, and it would have been difficult to sell it to Eros Now if it was not released, at least from a 2011 2012 mindset.
Hmm.
So, and we were also I mean, we had actually done DVDs also. We sold DVDs on Amazon and Flipkart. So we
Oh,
became
nice.
a vendor to Flipkart and Amazon, and thankfully it was a very sort of democratic process. And we told them that we'll be coming up with a DVD label for other independent films. It's just that after 2 years there was no DVDs at all. Like the
Hmm.
whole DVD market ended, the era ended. That was with respect to Shuttlecock Boys, and let's say for an engineered dream, we were lucky to found financing with the broadcaster itself. I mean, with documentaries, theatrical release are very rare in India. So we knew that is not something that we would, I mean, attempt about, or at least that's not something that we want to start from the beginning. So we were lucky to find financing with the Asian Pitch. Asian Pitch is a platform. Earlier, it was used to be a consortium of 4 broadcasters. Now it is 3. One in Japan, which is NHK, KBS Korea, and Taiwan PTS. All these are national broadcasters of these respective countries. So they would pitch in some money, and you make the film, and at least these channels will show it in their TV stations. In our case, what happened was there was also a sales agent that got involved. Again, sales agent hired by them, not by me directly. And then sales agent managed to sell the film to India also, in to History TV 18, and to CCTV in China, and lately to SBS in Australia, which is their national broadcaster. Although it is not a big money that they sold it for, because documentaries usually don't get good licensing fee. I mean, it is very less as compared to narrative feature films. But I thought it was at least a fairly good amount of distribution that it happened. So we were okay with that. And also, like I'm saying, every project is different. We also I did a commission project of a short film called Supergirl,
Yeah.
which was commissioned by a company called, it was used to be called School Cinema. Now it is called LXL Media.
Hmm.
So what happened? They have a business model. Their business model is that they only make films for kids or teenagers, and they license those films to schools to teach them life skills. And every year they would come up with 10 different ideas, and then they would float those ideas with independent filmmakers who will pitch as a one pager concept that would be, I mean, for any particular idea of those, from those 10 ideas. And these 10 ideas come from their research team. So in our case, what happened was they were making films for only 10-year-old kids. So we managed, found distribution through them. I mean, of course, they gave us money, we made the film, and then they distributed the film. I think a lot of people, at least a lot of kids of that age, saw the film because it was licensed in many schools, and it went to a lot of kids film festivals across the world. um, I think to my estimates, like at least 500,000 kids have seen the film, maybe more actually.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
That's
so
nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a different business model. And uh, so I'm trying to say is that all the projects have worked out in different ways. uh, Sometimes distribution has come attached to the producing, I mean the financing. And sometimes at least in Shuttlecock Wise, we have tried to find distribution after the film was made, which is actually more difficult.
Hmm.
So yeah.
What was the idea behind the documentary that, like, how did this idea come to you? The documentary called Japan in Nagaland. Like, how did you come up with this thought?
So I have a friend called Smita Verma, and she's a journalist, and she had written an article on the same thing.
Okay.
And I read that article and I found it very curious. And TSPTs has an open call. So in 2014 or 13, they had this open call, and I pitched this idea. Like I put this as an application, and they approved of it. They gave me some money, so I went to Nagaland and shot it. And I also why I was interested in this because I had never been to Northeast India before that, and I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
sort of use this as a medium to explore me exploring Northeast India as well to whatever extent it is possible. I don't really like going to places and as a tourist because that is I find it very superficial. So I think that was another way, like just go there, travel, and also make a film. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how I saw it. Uh, yeah,
Yeah. I relate to that. If you go somewhere, just make something
yeah,
in that place.
yeah,
That's nice. And it is a very wonderful documentary. It's about a very unheard subject.
yeah,
And it's fascinating how people in that place relate so much to Korean
mhm,
cinema or Asian cinema, Japanese
yeah,
culture. It's
yeah,
fascinating to know about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Could you tell me, how do you balance between the art that you want to create and the commerce that or the commercial needs of this city where you work from? Yeah.
Uh, so it is difficult, undoubtedly, but I think I've burnt my fingers enough in the last 10 years that I've probably learned a thing or two. So, so for commercials, just doing this may not be enough, honestly. I also have to do some corporate films. I have done quite a few in the past, but now it has come down a lot, especially after COVID, and also because I'm trying to focus on some other elements of filmmaking. So in the last 2 years, I've done only probably 4 or 5 small digital ads or small films, and also I stepped away from producing it. These small films, I just now work as a director on hire. So these elements are also these kind of side gigs are also important to keep the bills running or to keep paying the bills. So, but I'm trying that I should be in a better place in the next 3 4 years, so that I don't have to be dependent on extra side gigs and all the money needs can be taken care of the big long form projects. I'm okay with
Hmm.
documentaries or web series or narrative fiction films, but I just prefer long form. I'm more attached to long form. So but everything should come from that instead of me trying to juggle or hustle for money.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure this should be helpful for aspiring filmmakers who are listening to this podcast. Uh, and like I have this question,
Mhm.
as in now many people talk about uh, say this thing that it's very easy to make a film today because equipments are becoming cheaper and it's very accessible. But
Mhm.
how do you stand out when everyone is making something, and not just films? There is so much content out there everywhere, like on Instagram, on YouTube. How do you prove that your cinema verite short film, suppose you make a cinema verite short film, it's
Mhm.
different from a YouTuber's vlog?
Mhm.
Yes, how do you make that difference?
So this is something I've tried to pick up only last 3 4 years. I figured after a lot of let's say failures or a lot of mistakes that it is not about the skill primarily. It is about what is the politics of a person or what is the worldview of the filmmaker. That plays a much bigger role because the filmmaking skill can be learned, but what you are going to show in that shot or in that scene or in that film or sequence, that is going to come from the worldview. So for example, if I would have made the Shuttlecock Boys today, it would be a different film. But when I made it in 2008, I was 28 years old. My worldview was very different because I had come from software. I had no understanding of, excuse me, liberal studies, or I had no exposure. But slowly, when I And my exposure actually came from watching documentaries. My exposure to a lot of issues, whether it's social issues or political issues or whatever happening in the world, or my worldview was formed primarily by watching documentaries. So now, if I make a fiction project, it will be very different than. I mean, I'm not talking about the technical or naivety in Shuttlecock Boys, but I'm just talking about just the story itself on a broader scale. So I think if anybody is venturing into, especially filmmaking, of course, making viral videos on Instagram and YouTube are different ballgame. But if anybody wants to make films, then I think the focus shall be, in my personal opinion, I'm not an expert, but primarily more on forming the worldview first,
Mhm.
and this the technical skill, I mean, can keep happening. One can keep learning on the side, and but because there is less emphasis on forming a worldview generally in our
Yeah.
culture, I mean, let's say leave Bengal or Kerala, but generally speaking,
Yeah.
it is very less. So that's more important, I guess. And I think filmmaking schools also don't do much in that direction, which, in my opinion, that should be done. I mean, it's done. So it's great if somebody's come from, let's say, background of, I don't know,
Mm.
sociology or human rights or even journalism, for that matter, sometimes.
Yeah.
So that would it will form their worldview, and then they're trying to create a story from their worldview, unique worldview, hopefully, and then they use the skill, filmmaking skill, whether because filmmaking skill is not very difficult to learn. I mean, all the
Mhm.
Instagram or the influencers, they have also learned filmmaking skill very well. They use transitions better than a lot of commercial filmmakers, if you really see.
Okay.
so,
Okay.
so yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I've been having such conversations lately. Like,
Mm,
there is always this pressure that you have to do a certain thing, achieve a certain thing before a certain age in India,
yeah,
maybe around the world also. But it is very important to learn, and I think it's a very important point that you made, that one should form one's worldview through exposure first, and then
mm.
filmmaking can be learned, I think.
I think I was also I made myself victim of that thing that so I was 28 and I wanted to make a film before I turned 30. So hence I went and made Shuttlecock Boys. But by the time it got completed, I was already 32. So I even failed at that, barring failing at making the
Go,
film.
come on, don't have
No, no,
such thoughts. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, could you tell me about your future projects? What are you making next?
So right now I'm enrolled at a producing course with Pusa Nation Film School,
Okay.
which ends in November. So it's happening online because I couldn't get the visa to travel to Korea. I mean, some people got the visa. So for them, it is happening on site, but they have changed the course for people who couldn't make it to Korea. So, where I'm developing two fiction projects, narrative fiction projects, and at the same time, I'm trying to do a web series. The web series is about cybercrime.
Okay.
Um, and whereas the fiction projects deal with in a way indirectly deal with whatever is happening in the country, but not directly, but sort of indirectly.
Are
And
these going to be international co-productions or?
I am trying. So, for example, I
Okay.
have a project in Asian contents and film market, and I have actually a couple of meetings lined up next week. I don't know whether they'll be useful, but so I'm trying to form an international co-production, not for money primarily, but for exposure, for international acceptability, and to access some foreign markets. That's the prime objective
Hmm.
to so I'll try. If it works out, it's great. But if it doesn't work out, then I still want to continue on the path of making films this way or that way.
Sure. Sure. So, all the best with that. And we have come to
Thank
the
you.
end of the podcast. And it was lovely talking to you. Thank you for
Likewise.
being so honest, so candid, and sharing your thoughts on the films you have made and the journey you've had, and your thoughts on independent filmmaking and tips for future filmmakers. I'm sure many must have benefited from this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Shashi, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for having this podcast. First of all, thank you.
My pleasure. The
Yeah,
pleasure is mine.
yeah.
Thank you. All the
Thank you.
best with your projects.
Thank you,
Take care.
Shashi. Thank you. Okay. Take care. Bye bye.
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 Bye.